we have 3 candidates for Attorney General. Who are they? Very good. Very good. Who else? Ken Paxton?
Barry Smitherman.
Barry Smitherman. Right, that's right. And because you guys hustle in the parking lots, we have been privileged to meet all of them. And so tonight we have the last of the 3 candidates. Representative Dan Branch represents the heart of Dallas. You think the rest of Dallas agrees that your district is the heart of the center? It's the center of it. Okay, District 108 in the Texas House of Representatives. He's the chairman of the House Committee on Higher Education, a member of the Legislative Budget Board, as well as a member of the Calendars and Pensions Committee. At this point, I'm going to hand the rest of your background off to you. We would love to hear what you have to say about your vision for Texas, what you would do with this job. And then our folks have a whole series of questions, I'm sure, for you. So please help me welcome Dan Branch.
Well, thank you, Julie, and thank you all for allowing me to come by tonight. And let me first start off by saying thank you for your engagement. And you know, I wish more and more of our citizens were as engaged as so many in our Tea Party groups are. It's really, in our system, if we don't have the citizens engaged and holding public servants accountable, then the system doesn't work well. And it's designed to have citizen engagement. You know, when George Washington retired from office, he said in his farewell that he was going to return to be a citizen, and he saw that as sort of the highest role in a democracy. And so it's really important that everyone understands that public servants are here to serve citizens, and that we serve with the consent of the governed. And so you are the governed, and you are the government by the people, for the people, of the people. And so the public servants are your servants, or your representatives, and then you have the chance to every couple of years, depending on the term, replace that. And so that's how our system works. I thought if I could, as you say, tell a little bit more about me and my background, then talk about my vision for the Office of Attorney General, why I'm running, and then we'll open it up for some questions, and look forward to that. And that may be the most enjoyable part of the evening, so I'll try not to go on too long with the other stuff. You can look at if you're interested in getting more, I know you guys probably already know this, but you can look at danbranch.com, our website. And if you want to follow us on social media, on Facebook, we have a Texans for Dan Branch Facebook page, and we also have @TexansForDan on Twitter. And so we also have a YouTube site, and I think we just released a brand new video. If you're interested, we'll talk about that a little bit. But those are the places you can go to find more. Of course, you all know how to you find even more on Google and other places. And so, but let me just, so you get to hear it from me, let me tell you just a little bit about me. I grew up in San Antonio. As Julie mentioned, I represent the area of downtown, uptown, and near North Dallas in the legislature, and have done so for the last decade. If I am fortunate enough to complete my term, I'll serve for 12 years. And assuming I avoid the large buses and 18-wheelers in the Houston traffic or the Dallas traffic. But so I'm very fortunate to serve my community, my constituents, and have been reelected for 6 terms, and so feel very privileged to have that opportunity. And there's a reason why I represent the people of Dallas, as you might wonder, as growing up in San Antonio. I know some of you told me on the way in that you grew up on the East Coast, or grew up in Boston, and then moved to Texas. And so I'm in that category, certainly in terms of Dallas. I came to Dallas to go to law school, to go to SMU Law School. I had worked for Senator Tower, who was one of our first Republicans since Reconstruction to be elected to the Senate, kind of a young Ted Cruz-like figure in 1961. And so I had that opportunity after being a Goldwater Scholar, getting a chance to go to Washington and serve, and sort of read about the great, not only founding fathers, but some of the great thinkers beyond conservative thinkers beyond Senator Goldwater, like Milton Friedman and others. And so I've been inspired by these sorts of voices that were advancing, and a sort of up-and-coming former governor from California who ultimately got to work for right out after law school, Ronald Reagan. And so when I went to Dallas to go to law school, I paid a lot of attention. I did pretty well in school, and was pretty concerned first in my family to ever go to law school. My father was a doctor, and his parents had been school teachers and farmers, and so it was a pretty intimidating experience to go to law school. But by my third year, I was feeling a little more confident, and I looked up and realized there were some attractive co-eds on the campus of SMU, and eventually talked one of them into going out and eventually marrying me. So you know how it is when a boy from San Antonio, is it all right for me to move around? When a young lad from San Antonio meets a young girl from Dallas, and ultimately we decide to get married, I didn't quite make it back to San Antonio. And somehow that's how these things work. And so 30 years later, 5 kids later, we're now empty nesters. 3 out of college, thankfully, and 2 still in college. And I spent 30 years, 3 decades practicing law. And that's probably important for the job I'm approaching. And I've had the experience of not only out of law school working for the Texas Supreme Court. I had the really unique opportunity, and really fortunate to get to work for the Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court my first year out of law school. And that was an important experience for me, because I got to spend a year with arguably one of the more important judges in one of the more important courtrooms in our state, and sort of see how disputes ultimately can get resolved under our system. And so I tell my clients I spent the next 29 years trying to keep my clients out of the courtroom. And so whether that's been in a very large law firm, or whether that's been starting my own law firm and building it up to a pretty good sized boutique law firm, and ultimately merging that into another large law firm to which I'm a member of, one of the shareholders today. I've spent 3 decades practicing law at a pretty high level and a complex level, which is important. I've seen how big and small law firms work. The state has a pretty good-sized law firm, the Office of Attorney General, 700 plus lawyers, 4,200 employees. So it's in many ways the state's law firm. It's a big law firm, and therefore it's important to understand how to best manage large law firms, if I'm fortunate enough to have that opportunity. So that's a little bit about my background as a lawyer and as a family man. Stacy and I have been married now for 29 years in September. And as I said, we still have 2 in college, but one's a senior and occasionally fills in for me on the stump. Charles is doing a good job. He spoke for me in Goliad recently. And then our youngest daughter is a sophomore. So we're kind of, some people when they have 2 people in college are thinking, wow, this is really heavy lifting. I'm sort of thinking that I'm starting to see light at the end of the tunnel. So a little bit about our family. Let me talk a little bit about why I chose to seek this office. You know, Texas has had, I think Greg Abbott is the longest serving Attorney General in our state's history. He's the 2nd Republican. John Cornyn was the 1st. And I believe if he completes his 12 years next year, then he would be the longest serving Attorney General in our history, certainly in modern history. And so it's an important time for Texas, because we haven't had the opportunity to select a new Attorney General in quite some time. And so for me, it's really important that whoever follows in his shoes be someone that is really tough, is a fine lawyer, has spent many years in the practice, so they're a seasoned jurist, an attorney, because that's what the office calls for, and is someone that understands the current climate and will be not only tough and smart and competent, but will be willing to stand up and fight back against what I see as an overreaching and perhaps even arrogant maybe I don't even need to say perhaps, but a very aggressive, overreaching administration that currently seems to almost be picking on our state.
They are.
And so for me, this is a very important time, because the environment in which this new lawyer, the state's top lawyer, will be stepping into the position is at a time where I think we have a extremely aggressive federal government that doesn't seem to appreciate that there are states, and that there are states' rights under our system, and that there are individual, in our case, Texans, who have certain liberties under our system, and that it's not unpatriotic for citizens to point out that a national government created by the states has a certain role, and that the state government and the individual citizens in the state have a certain role, have a set of certain liberties that were part of our Constitution, certainly part of the ratification and part of the Bill of Rights. And so for me, I think we better have someone who has not only the tenacity, the confidence, the skills, the toughness, the integrity, but the willingness to step up and push back against a federal government that has showing a tendency to overreach. Now, we could talk about the IRS, the outrage of what we've seen with the IRS, or we could talk about what appears to be the imbalance of the NSA, or we could talk about the latest stuff of the DOJ and this current Attorney General, who wouldn't even wait for our Supreme Court decision in June that had held a certain piece of legislation, the Voting Rights Act, unconstitutional, at least the formula, and immediately comes into court in our state, in Nueces County, in Corpus, and in San Antonio, and immediately tries to undo what the Supreme Court did, as opposed to wait on the Congress to redraft the law that might be determined constitutional or not by the courts. And so we have, and we could talk about Obamacare, but wherever you go, whether it's the EPA, whether it's Obamacare, whether it's OSHA, whether it's the IRS, pick your agency, this U.S. Attorney General, we have an extremely aggressive federal government, and therefore we better have someone who can not only talk about pushing back, but actually has a record of pushing back. And let me tell you one story. I came into the legislature 10 years ago. I was very privileged to be there. I was sort of, showing up perhaps like Steve, your representative, Steve Tote, when he showed up. And when you first show up there, you feel just like a citizen, and after you're sworn in and your family goes home, you're standing there going, wow, I guess I'm now the elected representative, and so how does this work? And you're sitting in your chair, and I can still sense, walking up to the speaker's podium and asking a question and thinking, wow, this is really good access. I don't have to sit in the gallery. I can actually just walk up here and say something, and I get to vote. And so it's a really unique experience, and you feel really privileged to represent your district. And so I came in 2003, and I had, as a young lawyer, been I would say deeply disturbed by an opinion. I'd grown up in a family where we were very religious, conservative religious family. Going to church was very important in my family. I had 4 other siblings, parents. It was a big deal, and had been brought up as a person of faith. And so in 1985, as a young lawyer, I was deeply disturbed by the opinion of Wallace v. Jaffrey. This was an opinion where the Supreme Court, at least 6 activist judges in my view, overturned a state's law that had called for a minute of meditation or prayer every morning in the state of Alabama. And that just sort of bothered me, that in our country you couldn't have even a silent prayer in one of our states. And so one of the things I wanted to accomplish when I first got in was to fix that for Texas, because everyone had said, hey, we'll never have prayer in the school again. And I just didn't, I rejected that. And so I got in, we worked, got the right language, wanted to make sure it was sustainable, wanted to be thoughtful about it. Worked with Greg Abbott and his team, worked with a young solicitor named Ted Cruz. And I said, hey, we got to get this right because we know this is going to be attacked. It was attacked in Alabama. It's going to be attacked by the left. And so we worked hard to get their language just right. Passed it, House, Senate, Governor signed it. We were excited, but we knew it was going to be attacked. Sure enough, it was in federal district court. Solicitor Cruz successfully defended it. His successor, Solicitor James Ho, successfully defended in the Fifth Circuit. Jim's endorsing our campaign, which was a nice shot in the arm when he made that decision after looking at the other candidates. And so I have a record of not only talking about pushing back against a federal government or federal judges that are pushing down on states' rights, but I actually have a record of successfully pushing back against an overreaching federal government. And I will take lessons like that of being tenacious and careful and thoughtful with language and push back, because I can tell you what, the left, as aggressive it is, they take no prisoners. They've got an agenda. They got the media, mainstream media on their side acting like they don't have an agenda, but they have an agenda, and they have a results-oriented agenda, and but they're smart. I mean, they're smart and they're clever, and we got to have smart conservatives that are willing to push back and do the hard work and do the homework and stay up late and burn the midnight. Stay up after midnight and burn the midnight oil to make sure that we win these fights with the left. And so that's what I bring to. I have a record of doing that. Second reason, let me say one more thing. The federal government does have a role under our system, as you all know probably better than most. And so the national government, as it was formed, does have a role, of course, right? And so when you have an international border, a long international border like the state of Texas does, there's a federal role for the national government. And one of those roles is securing the international border of the country. You know, defend the country. And so that's a role. And so to me, the state's top lawyer not only should be standing up and pushing back against a federal government that has a tendency to overreach on state and individual rights and seems to have forgotten the 9th and 10th Amendment, but it also has a job, the state's top attorney has the job of standing up to the national government saying, yeah, you do have certain roles here, and please secure this border. And only lawful border commerce should be taking place. And you also, by the way, federal government, let's see, as our national government, you enter into treaties, and you're supposed to enforce treaties. So when you enter into a treaty with the country of Mexico, and we have certain rights to waters for our farmers, please enforce that. Please enforce that treaty. I mean, that's your role as the national government. And when you come into places like West Texas, a community just south of me, between Dallas and Waco, and your chief executive says you're going to come in and bring your federal relief, well then don't make us fight tooth and nail to have it come in. Why don't you have FEMA come quickly, early and often, and treat the state of Texas and our citizens like you treat any other state? And so to me, the role of the state's top lawyer is to stand up for Texas and for Texans, and to push back when they overreach. And when the federal government doesn't live up to its role as a national government, to remind it and hold it accountable, and go to the courts if necessary to make the federal government fulfill its role as a national government. So that's reason one for me for running for Attorney General, at least seeking the nomination of our party, the Republican Party, for the office of Attorney General of this great state of Texas. Point number two is, I think this position has a unique responsibility to maintain transparency in our state government. And what do I mean by that? We talked a little bit about at the beginning about how important the role of citizens and holding the public servants accountable is. It's really hard for citizens. When I wasn't in the legislature, I felt the same way. It's really hard for citizens to hold the public servants accountable if the citizens can't tell what's going on. And so transparency is really important, because transparency allows accountability. And accountability is what's supposed to take place in our democracy, because that's how citizens hold the public servants accountable. That's how you have an effective representative government, since we have this system. And so for me, the Open Records Division, interpreting our open meetings laws, the Public Information Act, these are really important areas for the Office of Attorney General. Let me give you a story again, because everyone's going to talk the talk. Everyone's going to talk about they want transparency, want accountability. But I have a record. See, I went in my first term and we passed more training for local governments on open meetings and open Public Information Act. I've been working all along. I worked in 2005, my second term, and finally was successful in my second term. I mean, in 2007, it would have been my third term. We ultimately passed, because I came in, I realized, I can't believe this. In our system, you could have a law that affected millions of Texans. We're approaching 27 million now. You could, back then was probably something like 25 or 24 million. But you could have a law back then that affected millions of Texans. And you know how it is. Every September 1, that's when the new budget year kicks in our state. We're a September 1 fiscal year, August 31. We know that the federal government is in October 1. We've sort of had some experience with that recently. And so every September 1, the newspapers write the story, oh, look, here's all the new laws that are going to affect your lives, and a lot of people read about them, and they say, man, I don't like that law. Why is that all of a sudden going to affect me? How did my representative vote on this? And you'd want to go check it out. When I came in, you could pass a law, send it to the governor, the House and the Senate could pass laws, send those to the governor without there being a record. So if it was really controversial, you could have one of these voice votes. It's a fancy term, viva voce, Latin term for a voice vote, but what it really is was a secret ballot. And no one was being held accountable. There was no one recording aye, nay, or abstaining. And so I thought that was unacceptable. I took some heat from my own party members. A lot of the older members who'd been around thought that that was okay. And I said, well, that can't be okay, because then you can't be held accountable. And so you can't have a law, like a final passage of a bill that's going to go into law and not be held accountable. That's what we get paid the big bucks to do, the $600 a month. And so anyway, ultimately we did get it passed, and the people of Texas agreed with us. 85%, I think it was, a constitutional amendment passed in November 2007, right about this time when we're considering our propositions. And so today, you cannot pass a new law in the state of Texas without there being a record for members of the House, members of the Senate, and millions of Texans absolutely now have a right to know, on final passage of any new law, how their members voted. So I have a record. I don't just talk about transparency and openness. I have a record of getting things done in this area. And it's a very important aspect to the job of the state's chief lawyer. Third point. I think this position is really important to preserving limited government in Texas. Okay? Okay, well that's easy to say. Everyone can make that platitude. We're all for limited government. We're Republican. We're conservative. But let me put a finer point on it. Limited government is a great heritage of this state, and it goes back to the debates of 1875 and ultimately the passage of the Constitution in 1876 following the Reconstruction period. And there was a great distrust of centralized power in Austin. And so there was such a distrust that we don't let the governor pick his attorney general or pick a cabinet. We elect them. We even elect our ag commissioner. We elect our railroad commissioners. So our whole, and I could go on and on, we have legislators that are citizen, not full-time, they're part-time, and they go home and live under the laws. And we only let them come in every other year. And they write a 2-year budget, and then they go home and live under it. And so one of our hallmarks is limited government. I mean, even in the courts, we don't just have one Supreme Court. We have a Supreme Court for civil, and then we have a Court of Criminal Appeals for our criminal jurisprudence. I mean, we're so distrustful of power, we divided it between 2 courts. So we could go on and on about, as many of you already know, that we care deeply about this notion. We don't just give lip service to limited government. I mean, Texans live it. And apparently, other folks may be liking it because 1,400 people a day, the demographers tell us, are coming into Texas each day. Well, why are they coming here? Well, someone says, well, because of the Texas miracle, because it's affordable housing, and because the summers are so mild, and I think they're coming here because our taxation is low. Our per capita taxation. There's an interesting article in Time magazine, a cover story, the United States of Texas, why people are flocking to the Lone Star State, why the future of America is Texas. I think they're coming here. They sort of get around to it eventually in that article. I think it's fairly self-evident. They're coming here because the government takes less off your plate. You've got more for your family from your hard-earned dollars, and the regulations are light. I mean, they're sensible, they're appropriate, they're, you know, it's like this is football season, right? How would you like to watch football if every play the referees were throwing the flag? I mean, every play. And at some point you'd say, hey, just let them play. And you know, and for families and businesses, it's the same way. At some point, let us come down here and let us live and give us the fewest rules possible, and then let us have our freedom, and let us innovate, and let us be creative. And if we want to do something in business, don't weigh us down with massive amounts of regulations that take so long to get something done that you just won't create a business, or you won't come up with a new idea because it's just too difficult. And there's places like that. You go to certain places in California, okay, anywhere in California, or places in New York City, or places in the Northeast, or even in the Midwest now, where they say, oh, it's just not worth it because there's so much red tape you got to go through. Forget doing a real estate deal, or forget doing a development, or forget starting a new business because it's just too much pain. And so I think people have figured out, hey, if you want to come down to Texas and have real opportunity, come to Texas. Not only will you have more money left, but you'll have an opportunity to try out your ideas and live, and you may enjoy it down here, even though we have some hot summers, you know, as long as we have air conditioning. And so why is it important for the Attorney General to help preserve limited government? Because you guys know it, of course. That's because, in a sense, that's why you're here, right? Because as important it is, as everyone says, we got to have an educated workforce and a knowledge economy. As important as everyone tells us, you got to have water. And I know there's disagreements about how to get there, but we all would agree that we need water. We have to have future water capacity. And everyone would say we have to have a certain amount. We have to have quality transportation so that, you know, I can get home at night and see my daughter's soccer game and not miss it every time in the traffic, or that I can, that is in my business, I can move my goods and services around without so much snarl that it's no longer fun to be in business because I can't move my goods and services around. And we're a highly productive state. Remember, we export more goods and services than California. California has, what, about 38 million people. We have 26, approaching 27 million. So we're a really productive state. So we need to have good means of transportation. We need to have water capacity. We need to have educated workers. We got to make sure we always have power so we can turn our computers and have that air conditioning in August. So those are all important as what people call, you know, the framework or infrastructure, or what I would call core functions of state government. We got to have all those. But what do we really have to have? Because when you go to other countries that don't have this, immediately investment dries up, and immediately people really don't want to be there because they don't have a rule of law. They don't have a framework, the ultimate infrastructure, a limited government framework that invites people in, that know that you have title, that know that you're secure, that know that a deal's a deal, that the rule of contract will be honored. And so the Attorney General has the AG opinion power. Everyone heard of Attorney General opinions? Right? This is a very important power. In fact, General Abbott tells me that he often rolls into his office on Sunday afternoon and stays there till well into the evening, something I grew up doing in large law firms. I've seen many a night where I've been there at midnight, and then I was there at 2, and then at 3, and then at 4, and by 4 you say, hey, why even go home? We're just going to keep working on this memoranda and get ready for the clients. And so he says he often stays up late because he's doing the final edits and then signing his AG opinions. Well, we better have someone in that position that takes those AG opinions very seriously, takes that position very seriously, because when you're ruling on all these tough questions that ultimately come to the Attorney General, you want to have someone that really believes that less is more, that clarity is better than ambiguity, that we really believe in this stuff we call limited government, and everywhere we can, we want to have less regulation, and lighter regulation, and sensible regulation, and less government. And so when I'm opining on that, let me tell you, if I'm fortunate enough to get elected to this position, I'm going to err on the side of less government. And I'm going to err on the side of more individual freedom. Thank you. So those are 3 of the reasons, probably for me, some of the more important reasons why I'm putting my name up for the nomination and seeking the nomination of our party. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk to you about that. And I would appreciate your serious consideration, and I would ask you humbly for your vote. So thank you. Julie said there's time for questions, and I said, of course. Philip.
Yes, one of the questions I've been asking each of the Attorney General candidates is, we have a toxic well that we put in here, and everybody's tired of me hearing about it. But it's one of the chances I have to actually ask the candidates about it.
Okay.
When I called
a toxic well.
Yeah, right. I called Attorney General Abbott's office, and they told me that they're there to protect the state agencies. Now, the thing is that, so you were talking about government overreach and the bureaucracies in Washington overreaching. Well, I'm worried, concerned about the bureaucracies of the state of Texas overreaching and not doing their job. And particularly the Texas Environmental Quality Commission ruled that this company, Texcom, could build a toxic well in our community up here in an old oil field with bad geology in it and all these undocumented oil rigs. Also, the company had lied on their permit to them, and the Texas Environmental Quality Commission went ahead and gave them a permit for it, which is being currently contested in court. So, considering that, what would you be willing to look at that kind of situation and see what they have done, to see if they have expressed due diligence or whatever in their ruling?
Yeah, did everyone sort of hear the question?
We heard the question.
Okay. Well, everyone knows that. Yeah. Hey, a fundamental role of government, of course, is public safety. I guess that's the ultimate fundamental role. That's right. And so, to me, that's where my principle would be that, you know, if it's an issue of public safety, and you're somehow going to infringe on other people's liberties by allowing someone to do something that's going to harm the neighborhood, well then, you know, that's an obvious place where government's supposed to protect the neighborhood, and obviously you gotta allow the I guess in this case the business owner, whoever's seeking the permit, he's got to have his due process, of course. But as a lawyer, I guess what I've learned is that it's hard to get involved in something when you don't know all the facts. And here's my style. I like to do my homework. I like to get all the facts. I don't think you can craft good policy as a legislator or find solutions as a lawyer without knowing all the facts. Because if you really know the facts, then a lot of times as you peel that onion back, then you figure out the solution. And not knowing one of the facts can cause you to lead you into either, whether that's making a new law that doesn't really fix the problem, or trying to find a solution. So I would commit to you that I would come in, I'd have my team, I try to hire smarter people than myself. That's what's another principle I have, get good people around you. And that's why I'm really honored to have so many of the Abbott senior lieutenants who looked at all the candidates endorse our message and our campaign, and so many of the crew's senior legal team and advisors that have looked at all three candidates and endorse our message and our campaign. But that's the type of constitutional conservative, young, smart, tough, tenacious young lawyers. Last week we had 8 U.S. Supreme Court clerks. All took a look at all three candidates, endorsed our campaign. So I'll get smart lawyers around me, and we better darn sure be responsive to the citizenry, because that's what we're hired to do. Come in and do our homework and look at all the facts, and ultimately rule for limited government. But limited government means protecting the health and safety of our citizens first. And that's the principles I would bring to bear on any situation like that. And I would promise to be courteous and responsive, because that's what government's supposed to be. You know, sometimes people would say, why do we care about DPS, whether or not they can get, you know, someone's license quickly? Because that's the front door of state government. Because in a course of a year, that may be the only government some citizen sees. And so we ought to be really courteous to those people when they come in and get their license. And if they're senior, we ought to find a place for them to sit. And we ought to move as quickly as possible and work through their license and get them their renewal and get them out of there, so that they get in their car and they go, you know what? I'm really proud to be in Texas. Because my state government cares about me as a citizen, because ultimately they work for me. Because I am the government. And that's why those little things matter. And so whatever your situation is, I would hope that the Office of the Attorney General would come in, do their homework, treat you appropriately, learn all the facts, and then act appropriately in the best interest of the neighborhood. That's how I'd handle it. Yes, sir.
Mr. Bryant.
Yes, sir.
Hey, I want you know, I'm going to go pick up on something you said, not what I was going to ask you about, but you only limited time. But
yes,
I want to ask you this. First of all, what kind of law did you practice?
I've been a transactional lawyer. As I said, I served my first year in the Texas Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And so in that process, I was involved in the litigation process and the ultimate appeal of litigation, right?
Okay.
So I've been in the firms I've been involved in, we are a full service law firms. So I've worked on transactional issues, business issues, family issues, disputes, litigation, all kinds of issues in the course of my career. But I spend most of my time in negotiations and advocating for clients and trying to keep them out of the courtroom.
You didn't practice any criminal law, did you?
I haven't practiced a lot of criminal law.
Good. Okay.
I try to stay out of that.
I want to ask you, because you're after
Yes,
the
sir.
federal government, you're going to do this. One of the complaints against General Abbott is, I want to first of all ask you, will you comment on how effective he's been? But one of the complaints, he spent a lot of money filing these lawsuits, and would you tell us how many he's filed and how many he's been successful in against the federal government, and how much it's cost?
Well, there's a lot of different reports on the costs, and I can tell you it's millions of dollars, and there's been a lot of them. I know there's been at least 30, and some would say the number is even higher. And I know when General Abbott goes around and speaks, one of his most famous and probably biggest applause lines is, he says, I go to the office, I wake up, go to the office, sue the federal government, and I come home. And everyone. So, in fact, I was sitting with I think it was Senator Cornyn, and I said, what you ought to say is you ought to get up and say, I go to the Senate, I wake up, go to the Senate, I vote against Harry Reid, and I go home. So there's been a lot of litigation. I think there could be even more, because I think we have a federal government that's even more tenacious and overreaching against Texas than General Abbott. And again, it's been an honor for our campaign to have all the people that he hired that he hired to fight back against the Obama administration. You know, the first assistants, the deputy the solicitor, the successor to Ted Cruz, Jim Hope, all these people, you can go on our website, they took a look at all the candidates and endorsed our message. So the guys that have been fighting Obama on behalf of General Abbott and doing a lot of the hard work and care deeply about this office and care deeply about protecting Texas, they took a look at all three of the campaigns and sided with our campaign. Julie.
So we obviously really deeply admire Ted Cruz.
Yep.
What he's trying to do, what he's trying to be successful doing. But regardless of where you are on what he's doing, he is tough, he is tenacious, and he has.
And he's smart.
He has the entire country. He's got a whole bunch of negative feeling directed at him, and he's standing firm in his position.
Yep.
We like that. That relates to one of our vetting criteria, which has to do with strength and character.
Yeah.
Understanding. Can you tell us in your own life whether or not you were successful? What instance comes closest to that?
To successful?
To what?
Whether it was or not.
Standing up, well, I guess I gave two examples.
But those examples had to do with other people helping you write the bill, and then other people pushed it forward in the law.
Yeah, no. Well, when you pass a piece of legislation, you've got to file the bill, and then you've got to make sure it gets through committee, and you've got to be the advocate for it, and then ultimately when it comes to the floor, you've got to go down front and stand in the well and advocate for it, and everyone can come to the back mic in our chamber and throw javelins at you, and they do, because it's good sport if nothing else, and you have to defend it. And you can have to fight off, there's been times when I've fought off 125 amendments and stood for 14 hours at the front mic. And everyone who comes to that back mic and has an amendment for you, they know everything about their amendment. And when you've got 125 of them, they know a lot more about their amendment than you do. Because you're going to sit there and take it, every amendment, and defend it. And so, serving in the legislature gives you the experience, and it's a very hard teacher if you don't know what you're talking about. In my chamber, there's 149 other folks that will quickly point out to you that you don't know what you're talking about. And so you better have done your homework, and you better know what you're talking about when you go stand in front and try to pass a piece of legislation. And you also better have tried to anticipate what all these amendments and all these folks at the back mic are going to say. Otherwise, it can get pretty embarrassing at the front mic for you, the author. And so, I don't know if that, but for me, the point is, when you pass a piece of legislation that you know is going to be challenged by the left, the point is to do it carefully and thoughtfully and anticipate, look down the road, okay, hey, we know this is going to be challenged. But therefore, because it's going to be challenged, we better make sure we write it really carefully. And that's why I sought out people like Solicitor Cruz. I said, hey, how are we looking on this? Because I want to make sure when you go into battle in federal court, in federal district court in Plano, which he did, that on behalf of General Abbott, that we have armed ourselves. And so I'm one who wants to pass conservative legislation, but do it in a way that's thoughtful and anticipates the javelins incoming from the other side, and so that in a way that we can ultimately be successful, and, as opposed to the case of Alabama where they were unsuccessful. In this case, the plaintiffs decided, after losing in federal district court and then losing at the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans, I was kind of secretly hoping they'd go to the Supreme Court. I thought it'd be fun to win in the Supreme Court. I felt good about our chances. But they didn't take it that far, and so they decided to go home and not come back for more after we beat them in the Fifth Circuit. So I hope that shows a certain level of tenacity and also a certain level of preparation to make sure that when you're doing the crafting, one of the things lawyers are supposed to be, and as someone who's practiced for 3 decades, words matter. Wordsmithing, precision, it's very important to a lawyer. You gotta be very careful with your words, whether those are spoken words or written words. And we all make mistakes, we're all human, but when you're drafting legislation, you got to check and double check and recheck and make sure and get it right, because ultimately when you're sitting in front of a judge or a jury or a set of appellate judges, they're going to ask tough questions and they're going to parse every word. So it's important. That's a lawyer skill that's really important.
You haven't said much about border, and you mentioned it, but
Yeah.
I'd like to know what you would do to defend Texas along our border with the federal government.
Yeah.
The heck with Mexico, let's get the federal government.
Yeah. Well, the federal government needs to.
Yeah, I understand. I'm being facetious, but go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah. The question is, what would I do as
Yes.
Attorney General about the border?
Because we have an adversarial federal
Right.
Attorney General.
Right.
What would be your role?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about my background on that. As someone who's voted to send, I think now, $500 million or $500 million to the border for local law enforcement, you know, we used to say, hey, this is a federal government problem. And we had so many citizens say, well, what can we do? I mean, the federal government's not doing its job, so.
I have a nephew who was a border patrol. I heard
Yeah.
it.
So I have been one who's tried to send equipment and resources down to our counties along the border to help local law enforcement, to protect Texans, okay? I think that the federal government should secure the border. I've spent a lot of time along the border. People along the border say, hey, be careful. I mean, make sure it's really important to us to have legal commerce, and so please be careful and thoughtful about it. And I respect that. I mean, if you go to El Paso and you go to Brownsville and you go to Del Rio and you go to along these cities, I mean, they've grown up along the border and they take it very personally and they want to have trade and commerce because that's how they make their livelihood. So the federal government ought to allow lawful commerce, but the federal government ought to protect our international border. Job one, right? And so how do you, and when you have an administration that says, oh, they're doing that, well, the way you hold anyone accountable is you have to have transparency and you have to know what are the metrics. I mean, how many people are actually, how many illegal crossings are there per day, per week, per month? I mean, you have to have measurable objectivity to know whether or not the federal government, when it says it's doing a better job of protecting the border, it really is. So that we as citizens can say, well, either you are or you aren't. Let's see what the numbers are, because the numbers don't lie. And so we ought to have metrics that tell us whether or not they're doing a better job, and we ought to hold the federal government accountable. And if they're not, then we ought to pursue them, and the state's top lawyer ought to bring litigation to bear to say, obviously, based on these metrics, you are not protecting our international border, and hold the federal government accountable.
So you can sue them.
Yeah, that's right. Go to court and say you're not doing your job as a national government. And I think you also realize you try to do everything else you can. And that's the whole process of negotiation. Understanding, get in there and understand all the facts. You know, Margaret Thatcher used to say the way you win is you got to win the argument and then you win the vote. And so it's really important to understand the facts about the border so that when you engage with the federal government, you're better prepared than they are. And you know all the facts, and so that you can win the argument and prove up to them that you aren't defending the border. And if you can win that argument, whether you're going to win it in the court of public relations or whether you're going to win it in a district court or a trial court or a federal court, you're going to win the argument. And you're going to win it on appeal if a case goes up on appeal. So to me, that's why I raised the issue with him. Knowing the facts for a lawyer is the starting place. And then knowing what the law is to bring all leverage you can to bear to make that national government fulfill its role.
I have just,
We
I would do that.
If you have a
real
really
fast.
short.
Well, there were two little issues that not little issues, but two more points. Things I've been hearing is that border states need to work together because we need to help each other form a block to get across our points to the federal government. What would you do to
Work with it, yeah.
To do that.
Work with states' attorney generals from Arizona, New Mexico, California, absolutely.
Would you have a division or an assistant, or how would you set that up?
Yeah, I would absolutely make that one of my high priorities, to work with. In fact, there was a really good article, you should commend it to you if you haven't already read it, a cover article by Fred Barnes, the Weekly Standard, about how the last bastion of defense against this federal government are the state's attorney generals across the country, and Republican state attorney generals are sort of the last place to push back, since we don't have the Senate, and we don't have the Oval Office, and we don't have the executive branch. The place to push back are Republican, conservative states attorney generals. And the more careful, tenacious, thoughtful, tough, smart they are, then the better job we're going to do of pushing back this aggressive federal government. I absolutely would work with them.
Well, the other little quick one is that we had somebody talk about all the families that come across who are illegals. The students are actually born, they're not citizens, they weren't born here. What would you be doing?
Yeah, no, I was in Brownsville where the guy who drove me to our Republican club meeting told me about where kids that were being marched across the border and to go to school, and they were returning home in the evening across the border. Well, you can't have that. It's unacceptable.
Well,
it's illegal.
Yeah, but it's happening.
Well, so you got to get down there and engage.
Send the Boy Scouts.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.